It's 2 a.m. The room is quiet in the way that only failure makes quiet. Not peaceful, not still, just empty of everything that used to matter. He's sitting on the floor, not because he chose to sit there, because his legs stopped holding him and the floor was simply where he ended up. The laptop screen is still open, the rejection is still on it. The 3rd one this week, the 11th one this month. He hasn't eaten since morning, he hasn't slept properly in 11 days, and tonight specifically, something inside him reached a wall that didn't feel like a temporary obstacle. It felt like the actual end of the road, like the architecture of his ambition had finally buckled under its own weight. He thought about stopping, not resting, not pausing, stopping. He set down the thing he had carried for years and walked away from it without looking back. He was so close to doing it. What he did next changed everything. But here's what no one tells you about never give up stories. They don't begin with inspiration. They begin with a man on the floor in the dark who has completely run out of reasons to stand. You need to understand how he got there. Because people want to skip this part. They want the comeback without the collapse. The sunrise without the night that preceded it. That's not how it works. He had started 3 years earlier with something rare, genuine conviction, not borrowed motivation, not someone else's dream he'd adopted because it sounded good at a dinner party. His own, earned through years of watching the wrong life slowly drain the colour out of him. He left the secure job, the comfortable job, the job that paid on time and asked nothing extraordinary of him. Everyone told him the timing was wrong. He went anyway. First year, hard but survivable. He was running on the fuel of the beginning. Beginnings have their own energy. New chapters always do. The work was raw, the income was inconsistent, but the direction felt right, and direction can carry you through a great deal of difficulty. Second year, harder. The novelty wore off. The learning curve steepened. He made a strategic error that cost him 6 months of progress and a significant portion of his savings. He told no one. He absorbed it quietly and rebuilt. Third year, something shifted in a way that was harder to name. The effort was the same. The commitment was the same. The discipline, if anything, was sharper than it had ever been. He was waking earlier, working longer, cutting everything that didn't serve the goal. And the results were diminishing. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would make a clean narrative, just quietly, steadily, refusing to match the input. That particular cruelty, where your best work produces your worst outcomes, has a specific weight to it. It doesn't just exhaust you physically. It begins to question your judgment, your instincts, your capacity to read reality accurately. You start to wonder if you were wrong. Not situationally wrong, not tactically wrong, but fundamentally, constitutionally wrong. Wrong in your reading of yourself. Wrong in your belief that you had something worth offering. That kind of doubt doesn't announce itself loudly. It moves quietly through everything you do. It lives in the pause before you start working. It lives in the moment before you submit something. It lives in the silence after someone doesn't respond. By the time he hit that floor, the doubt had been living there for 7 months. He had just been too stubborn to let it speak at full volume until that night. That night, it spoke at full volume, not a whisper, not background noise. The full force of 3 years of accumulated uncertainty arriving simultaneously. You've had a version of this. If not yet, you will. The moment when everything you've been carrying becomes briefly heavier than everything you believe, where the weight wins. Not permanently, but in that specific hour, at that specific temperature, it wins. He sat with it. He didn't immediately fight it. He didn't reach for a podcast or call a friend or go for a midnight run to metabolize the feeling into something more manageable. He sat with it on the floor. And in the sitting, in the not running from it, something became visible that had been invisible while he was moving. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of having been wrong about himself. Those are not the same fear. They look identical from the outside. They feel almost identical from the inside. But the distinction matters more than almost anything. Failure is external. Failure is an event. Failure is something that happens to a plan, to a product, to a strategy. Being wrong about yourself, that's structural. That's the foundation. That threatens not just what you're doing, but who you decided to become. He had been fighting the wrong fear for months. Every time he'd tried to solve for outcomes, he had been treating a bone-deep question about identity as if it were a logistical problem. No wonder he was exhausted. He had been bringing spreadsheets to a conversation that required something much older and quieter than data. He was not going to be argued out of this moment. He was not going to be motivated out of it either. Something else entirely was required. He picked up something he hadn't touched in 2 years. A notebook. His first notebook. From before the plan, before the strategy, before the structure. The handwriting was messier back then, the ideas were rougher. Some of them were embarrassingly naive. But the hunger in those pages was unmistakable. He read it not to remember why he started. That advice is too simple and mostly useless in a genuine crisis. He read it to find out who he was before he started performing the role of someone pursuing this. There's a difference. When you first begin something that matters to you, you're not performing anything. You're just moving toward what you want with the directness of a person who hasn't yet learned to be strategic about their own desire. Then success, or the lack of it, starts teaching you to perform, to present, to calculate, to manage how you appear to be progressing. And somewhere in all that performance, the original signal gets buried. He found the original signal in that notebook. It wasn't a memory, it wasn't nostalgia, it was a live current, still active, still running, just completely buried under 3 years of accumulated self-management. The question was never whether he should continue. The question was whether he had been continuing as himself. He hadn't. He had been continuing as a more polished, more strategically calibrated, more externally presentable version of himself, and that version was exhausted because performing is always more exhausting than being. The work hadn't broken him, the performance had. That's not a small distinction. That's the entire diagnosis. Everything that had felt like the problem was a symptom of this single, central displacement from himself. He was still sitting on the floor, but something had shifted in the architecture. Now I'm talking to you directly, not to him, to you. You're reading this or hearing this, but because something in your situation rhymes with his. So here is what I need you to do, not abstractly, concretely. Tonight, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve. Tonight you are going to find the original version of why you started, not the polished explanation you give to other people, the raw, unedited, almost embarrassing version that lived in you before you had a strategy for it. Write it down by hand, not digitally. By hand, on paper, in a room where no one is watching. Write it in the present tense as if you are that earlier version of yourself, the one who hadn't learned yet to be careful about wanting things. You are going to feel resistance doing this. Good. The resistance means you've been performing. The resistance means you've drifted. The resistance is useful information, not an obstacle. After you've written it, and you must actually write it, not just think about it, you are going to audit your current work against what you wrote. Where have you compromised the original signal? Not tactically. Tactically, you should absolutely adapt. But where have you compromised the thing you actually care about producing? Where have you made the work smaller, safer, and more palatable because you were afraid the real version would be rejected? Find those places. Then systematically remove every modification you made from fear, not from wisdom, not from genuine strategic thinking, from fear. You know the difference. You've always known the difference. You are going to rebuild the next version of your work from the stripped back original, not from the accumulated layers of self-protection. This will feel vulnerable. It should. Vulnerable and exposed is what real work feels like before it finds its audience. You are also going to stop measuring outcomes for 30 days. Not because outcomes don't matter, well, they matter enormously. But right now your measurement habit has become a mechanism for self-punishment. It is not informing your decisions. It is just confirming your fear on a daily basis. 30 days. Build. Don't measure. Work from the original signal. After 30 days, measure with fresh eyes. This is not inspiration, this is a repair process. Treat it as one. Do this tonight. The floor is waiting for you to leave it. He stood up, not because the circumstances changed, they hadn't. The rejection was still on the screen, the savings were still diminishing, the uncertainty was still real, heavy, and unresolved. He stood up because he finally understood what he was standing up for, not the outcome, not the success story he'd been trying to manufacture. Not the validation he'd been quietly, desperately seeking from an audience that hadn't yet arrived. He stood up for the original thing, the thing that was his before anyone else had an opinion about it. That distinction between performing your ambition and actually inhabiting it is the difference between a person who eventually breaks and a person who eventually builds something that lasts. He went on to do exactly that, but that's not the point of this. The point is the floor. The point is what's possible inside the worst hour when you stop running from it, when you sit with it long enough to hear what it's actually telling you. The never give up stories that matter aren't about refusing to stop. They're about finally stopping long enough to find the thing worth continuing for. He's still in the room, in the dark, waiting for you to begin.